My name is Bill McGladdery, and I'm the Director of Corporate Communications for Town Pump, and I currently serve as Chair of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. A tradition we have at the Chamber is that we pause for a moment of silence to think of those who are protecting and defending us around the world today. Would you please join me? God bless them and keep them safe. I hope you had a great evening last night and are ready to hear from our legislative leadership this morning on all things legislative, electoral, and political. Before we jump into that, let me take a moment and thank our sponsors. Our platinum sponsors this year are Big Sky Chamber and Visit Big Sky, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Charter Communications, Town Pump. Our gold level sponsors include AT&T, Associated Employers, Boeing, Cloud Peak Energy, First Interstate Bank, Montana State Fund, Northwestern Energy, and Pacific Source Health Plans. Our silver level sponsors are Billings Clinic, Crowley Fleck, CenturyLink, Glacier Bank, High Heat Industries and Russell Spica CPA, Microsoft, Mid Rivers Communications, Montana Health Co-op, the Office of the Commissioner on Higher Education, Republic Services, Shodare Children's Hospital, TransCanada, Tri-County Implement, University of Montana, Valley Bank of Helena, VisionNet, and the Washington Companies. Our bronze level sponsors this year include BNSF Railway, Denbury Resources, Montana Bankers Association, Montana Hydraulics, Montana State Library, Montana's Credit Unions, Morrison Merrily, Payne West Insurance, Seabain Stillwater, Tohall, and Weyerhaeuser. And our copper level sponsors this year include Great Falls College MSU, the Kalispell Chamber of Commerce and Convention and Visitors Bureau, Midland Claims Service and Industrial Claims, Injury Claims, and UBS. Thanks to all of our sponsors this year. And at this point, I would like to introduce Bridger Malum, our Government Affairs Director at the Chamber of Commerce.
All right, good morning, everybody. I hope for those of you who joined us at the banquet last night that it was a great event. Just, again, really appreciate all your support of what we do here. So as Bill mentioned, I'm Bridger Malum. I've been Government Relations Director for the Montana Chamber for about 2.5 years. I'm going into my sophomore effort here as far as legislative sessions are concerned, with a little in-betweener there with the November special session in 17. I'm filling in for Richard Mildenberger, our board member and Vice President of Government Relations. He's battling a little bit of a cough today, so you get to deal with me instead. But we really all can expect some exciting times ahead with the opening of the 2019 legislative session as of yesterday. And it marks the second session during which the Montana Chamber will be guided by its 10-year strategic plan, no surprises here, folks, Envision 2026. Through legislative and private sector initiatives, the Chamber is focused on making measurable progress in 4 critical areas: workforce development, business climate, infrastructure investment, and entrepreneurial sustainability. And we certainly look forward to advancing those goals and plans in the 2019 legislative session. So with that, I welcome you to our long-standing Eggs and Issues breakfast when we get an opportunity to hear from Montana's legislative leadership. And I'm honored to stand with these panelists who, along with their legislative colleagues, several of whom may be in this room, will put their normal lives on hold, many of them once again, to serve Montana. So we greatly appreciate that. And I'm pleased that we have with us a full complement of our legislative leadership. We have Speaker Greg Hertz. He represents House District 12 in the Polson area and has served in the legislature since 2013. Greg was Speaker Pro Tem during the 2017 legislative session and is a former member of the Montana Chamber Board. We're also joined and happy to have Minority Leader Casey Schreiner. He serves House District 26 in Great Falls, and having been in the legislature since 2013 as well, Casey was elevated to the leader of his caucus after serving as Minority Whip in the 2017 session. And then, of course, we also have Senate President Scott Sales of District 35 in Bozeman. He's had a long career in the Montana legislature, having served in the House from 2003 to 2009, and then in the Senate since 2013. He's only the second Montanan, at least from what I could find, in state history to be presiding officer of both the House and the Senate, and will be going into a second consecutive term as president of that chamber. And then last but certainly not least, we have another longtime legislator in Senate Minority Leader John Sesso. He served Senate District 37 in Butte, and by the end of this session, John will have spent his entire Senate career as leader of his caucus. And he also served in the House from 2005 to 2011. So please, again, help me welcome our legislative leadership and thank them for the work they do for Montana. Excellent. Well, and I guess we'll start with Speaker Hertz, and then go down the line here with Representative Schreiner, followed by Senator Sales, and close with Senator Sesso. And after all their remarks are completed, some of our staff will have roving microphones around the room to be able to have a productive question and answer session. So greatly appreciate it, and Mr. Speaker, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Bridger, and I'd like to thank the Montana Chamber and all the business people who've come to Helena each and every year to provide us the feedback as to what we should be doing up there on the Hill. Of course, one of the top priorities is always the budget, getting that out the door in a timely fashion. And I believe, looking at our revenue projections, looks like we have adequate revenue to continue to fund our budget in a sensible manner. And I don't see any need for any tax increases. I just don't see there's a flavor for a tax increase coming out of the House. And then we're going to be looking at workforce development. As an employer myself, and talking to a number of other employers, it is difficult out there to find individuals who want to come to work, stay to work, have the proper skills. So we need to continue to look at, make sure we're developing our workforce so the employers have the ability to expand in the state. And of course, Medicaid expansion, that's going to be a big issue in the legislature this session. We will have probably several bills looking at that, working them through the House and the Senate, seeing different ideas that we can come up with, whether this program can continue in a form that might make more sense and more manageable for the state of Montana. An issue that's near and dear to my heart, since I live on Flathead Lake, is aquatic invasive species, and we will continue to make sure that does not spread into Montana. One of the issues with that, we need to look at a funding source, a consistent funding source for the AIS issue, and go forward with that, and just make sure that we keep that out of our rivers and lakes. Infrastructure is an issue that we always work on through the session, and over each and every session, there's probably close to $1 billion of infrastructure that is out there, whether it's water, sewer, roads, bridges, etc. We always get hung up on the bonding bill, and we come down to disagreements on different buildings, different other ideas that we should fund. And that is generally in the $50 to $75 million range. It's not huge in relation to what we do spend, but there is a need out there for help and assistance, especially in some of the essential infrastructure, the water and sewer, especially in some of our smaller communities. But my goal would be, let's start looking at a longer term plan on funding these. It could be a possibility of cash and some bonding, and then look at a plan. If we do have additional cash, can we use that to accelerate some of the bonding payments? But I think if we get a program that might look at funding something for a decade, maybe we can get out of this argument as to which projects that we want to fund, and then if we have a plan and a program, then we can start prioritizing some of those projects. Another big issue, of course, is public access to our public lands for each and every one of you, to make sure that we can access those. So we want to continue to work with private landowners so we don't infringe upon their property rights, and incentivize them to allow people to cross their property through easements, through other methods, and access our public lands. Healthcare issues are, of course, a big issue. For me as an employer, as I know everybody in this room, you have seen your insurance cost skyrocket over the last 15 years or so. And in addition to not only that, your employees are suffering with very high deductibles. So it's becoming less and less of a quality benefit. One of the issues, and Commissioner Rosendale is working on that, is possibly looking at a reinsurance pool, which I think would really help across the state and could help take care of some of those very large claims. And then that looks like it could possibly lead to maybe double-digit reductions in premiums for health insurance. The opioid addiction problem and the meth problem impacts each and every community in the state. It doesn't seem whether you live in the larger cities or the rural areas. You know, I know in Polson, we've seen a significant impact with both those two drugs. So I know the AG Fox is looking at some various initiatives to help with not only the opioid but the meth problem. Law enforcement needs some additional resources and help too. One of the issues that I'm working on is some of these meth houses that are hard to clean up, maybe shut down for a while, and we need to work with the realtors, the landlords, and make sure that everything is fair as we go into, and we never want to infringe upon private property rights. But I've seen a number of these meth houses just continually overturned, particularly in our community, where law enforcement comes in and arrests somebody, and then 2 weeks later, there's more dealers back in the same house, and it's just a continual turnover, and they're reaching out and need some help. So with that, I will allow these other individuals to lead in as to where we might be headed. Thank you.
You know, the great thing about legislative panels is the very first person takes all of our priorities, and then we're like, well, what they said. Good morning. Casey Schreiner again from Great Falls. Thank you all, one, for inviting us, but two, being the economic drivers of how we make Montana a better place. And I can say that as somebody who in my day job gets to work with a bunch of the people in this room on how we move Montana's economy forward, as far as specifically directed at how we enhance your folks' opportunity for growing our workforce. The interesting thing about all the priorities that the speaker talked about is I think that we would see those as the priorities too. And the great thing about this is that we understand they're all interconnected. There is not one of those topics that you can take singularly and not think that it affects all the others. And so I would say I would start with the fact one of the priorities the speaker talked about was the healthcare issues. So I'll talk at a little higher level and how, and I think that we got to figure out how to find a solution in healthcare that works, that drives costs down for consumers, allows providers to still be able to make a living, but then ultimately makes people healthier. And that's something we're very focused on, because at the end of the day, if we don't do that, if kids aren't healthy, they don't go to school and they don't get the training they need to be good employees for you in the future or business owners in the future. If parents aren't healthy, same exact thing, they can't provide for their children to put them in a place to be successful in the future. And at the end of the day, I think our entire mission at least from our perspective, and specific to this session, is to make sure at the end of this legislative session we've put Montana's people and Montana's economy in a position to be successful for the long term, which is not always a message I would say that you'll hear from the Democratic caucus. I think that's always what we've always driven for and hoped for, but I don't think we've led with that. And I think that's really important, that our focus this session is going to be solutions-based. And that's pretty easy given that there's some issues that we can all identify. The nice thing, and I've said this in a couple speeches, the nice thing about being in the minority party is every solution that we accomplish has to be bipartisan. We know we have to work across the aisle and work with many of you and our Republican colleagues to actually accomplish things. So we have we keep saying our sleeves rolled up, we're sitting at the table and we're ready for partners, and we've had them. I will tell you that we are in a position this session where I feel like there's a lot of collaboration happening. It's great to hear the speaker talk about Medicaid expansion, because we all understand that we can't leave upwards of 100,000 people in a place where their health care is hanging in the wings, because I mean, your entire life is focused on if you think you're going to be healthy and how you can provide. So healthcare is a big one. Workforce development is a passion of mine, which I think in leader position helps kind of bring it to the forefront of what our caucus is looking for. We know our economy can't succeed unless you are able to, as employers, have a workforce that can increase your efficiencies and productivities, because at the end of the day, we need to do things like increase Montana's wages. Well, I know you can't do that if you're not producing more and bringing in more revenue. So it's our job to make the playing field a place where you all feel that you're in a position to do that. So we are very open to ideas. You are the experts. We do not create jobs. We create an environment that allows you to be successful, to be able to create those jobs. And we're that is one of our priorities this session for you as employers. The infrastructure conversation is an interesting one. We obviously think we need to do this. If for nothing, then in any situation where you kick the can down the road of not funding something, it just gets more and more expensive. And the more expensive it is, I truly believe the lower quality product we're going to end up with in the end, because we don't have the money eventually to fund all the things that are needed. And then it becomes a real crisis. And in some situations, we're there. But we also have to view that as an opportunity for economic development. And I will use the example of the Great Falls Project, which is obviously near and dear to my heart, because that's the community that I grew up in and I live in now. It's the only dental hygiene program in the state. If we want our employees to stay in Montana, we know we have to grow our own. And this relates back to workforce development. We can't just view it as an education building. We have to view it as a driver for economic development, so that we can have dental hygienists come in there. They're more likely to stay in Montana, specifically rural Montana, where we have a shortage of healthcare providers. We have to stop viewing these as just structures, but what the structures actually are intended for. And so that's why we are always behind the I guess as we're referring to them now, vertical projects as well as horizontal, because you make the money for the horizontal projects off of good, high quality, state-of-the-art vertical projects. That's how we grow the economy and we have a long-term success. So I'll stop there. I will pass it on. Obviously questions are way better I just like to talk, so I'll stop.
Well, I want to thank you folks for allowing me to come talk to you again. It's been quite a few times that I've had the privilege of attending this meeting and being able to get input from your group and answer some questions, as well as maybe talk a little bit about where the Senate's going and the legislature. These guys are really well prepared to go to the Senate, because we don't have any time limits over there, and they've droned on and they've said some good things, and I'm glad to hear that there's going to be some cooperation over in the House, and this bipartisanism is alive and well, and this is going to be my last session unless we have another Democrat-controlled called session like we had back in November of 17. I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to working with my counterpart, John Sesso. We've had the privilege of working together now for, pretty much our whole legislative careers. And I would call John a friend. I don't know if you will reciprocate, but it's been a real pleasure working with John, and I'm just super pleased that he's going to be the minority leader, and look forward to serving with him in our last session together. So I want to thank you for that, John. Anyway, the one thing I would say about healthcare is that if we really want to drive healthcare costs down, we need competition, and individuals need to have some skin in the game. If someone else is going to pay the bill, then there's really not very much incentive for me to get the best deal as the patient. And as we move to a more and more single-payer model, including Medicaid expansion and everything else that we've done, there's just going to be less competition. There's going to be less incentive for people to make the right decisions on their own, which is really the best way. Government is a very poor organization in terms of putting resources in the right place at the right time to get the most bang for your buck. Individuals can make a lot better decisions in their own life, and they make better decisions when they have to pay for it. I'm sure I've brought this example up, but I had a corporate job for about 20 years and had excellent health care benefits for that entire time. Back in the 80s and 90s, if you had a good corporate job, you didn't pay for your insurance. And if one of my kids had a sore throat and they wanted to go to the doctor, you just said, well, just go to the doctor. And then about 18 years ago, I ventured out on my own and got a catastrophic health insurance policy, and the kids then were, they were teenagers or so, or some of them were anyway, and they would say, Dad, I got a sore throat, and I'd say, well, check back with me in a week. If it's still sore, we'll go see the doctor. And 90% of the time, their throat wasn't sore in a week, and we saved the money, and all of them are still upright and taking nourishment. So anyway, I think that we need to get back to a model where people have skin in the game, where they got to make better, responsible choices, and when it hits you in the pocketbook, that's the best way to do it. In terms of the budget, very quickly, the revenue forecast that the Republicans passed in the 17th session has proved to be right. Revenues came in. They did take a little flat line for a while, but they're now on the increase. And I agree with the speaker that we're going to have enough money to live within our means. Had we just cooler heads prevailed, we wouldn't have had to have the 17th session. We wouldn't have had to institute the cuts that the governor gave us. I want to remind the people, I read a little op-ed yesterday that somehow placed the blame on the Republicans in the 17th special session for making these cuts. I want to remind the people those were the governor's cuts. He was the one that came up with those list of things that needed to be trimmed. And as good stewards of the tax dollars, we just followed through with what the governor indicated that he wanted. We've lived within our means. I agree with the speaker that there isn't any appetite for a tax increase this session. We had these same proposals on the table in the 17th session. We had them again in the 17th special session. And I think we're going to reject those as non-starters again in this session. At least I hope we do, because we do have sufficient revenue to do what we need. Is there anything else? I'm sure you'll be asking a few questions. I'd love to answer them if I possibly can. Once again, I want to thank the Chamber, thank you individuals. I agree with Representative Schreiner that the private sector is where the best ideas come out of. You guys are the things that the people that make the economy work, hire people, create wealth, and make individuals, give them the opportunity to succeed and provide for themselves, which I think is the best economic model, and it's proved to work extremely well over the years. So once again, I thank you again, and I'll turn it over to my good friend John Sesso.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's kind of a pleasure to back clean up here and refute everything that was said by my colleague in the Senate. Seriously, though, I wanted to first, and I've been looking around and I don't see him, but I know you probably have done it enough. But I wanted to recognize Webb Brown for the service he's provided through the chamber over the years, and I wish him the best of luck. I don't see him here. Is he? I guess he's a short timer and he's out. So I just wanted to do that. He's been a effective advocate for the business community and the chamber all these years. So congratulations to Webb on his retirement, and wish him the best of luck. I am also here for the fifth time, speaking with you at 7:30 in the morning, and as some of my colleagues from Butte over there know, that I don't operate too well before 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, but I am glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity, as always, to speak with the business community and share my thoughts, which are not unlike my colleagues. And I will reciprocate. If this was the 2010 or 2009 chamber breakfast, I wouldn't be able to say what I'm about to say about my colleague, Scott Sales, but it has been a relationship that has been built over many years now, and we've both grown up in the legislature and gotten a lot of experience and come to realize what it takes to be a good leader and to work together. And I do consider him my friend now, and as well as the leaders in the House, and so we are making strides to do what I think Montanans and you as the business community and all of our citizens want, and that is for people to get along, to address our challenges together and be civil. One of the, I think, most important things I did in the interim was to participate in a seminar on civility and the lack of civility in the world today, not just in the legislature, which I think we're improving on from some of our lowest points in the not too recent past, but all of society. I think that the internet provides a forum to be uncivil, and I think has had a bad effect on our society in that regard. And I would reach out to all of you to join us and join all of your colleagues to disagree and be passionate in your disagreements, make your points with conviction, but to always be civil and respectful of each other. And I think we can get a lot more done in that way. And I think we've demonstrated that in the Senate and in the House in these past few sessions, and it's getting better and better, and we pledge to continue to do that, because I know that's what you want, and that's what the citizens of our state expect from us as statesmen. As far as remarks here, I think there's not that much that separates us. Democrats, we sometimes get tagged with, we want to tax you to death and use that money in ways that are not productive. That's just not true. We care as much about every tax dollar that all of our citizens pay as our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Nobody wants to raise taxes. Nobody wants to take more of our hard-earned money away from us. It's just a universal thought that every politician will stand up and tell you. And so let's not get into whether one side wants to raise your taxes and the other side doesn't. Let's just make sure, as we have, and as somebody who has been part of the budget process for my entire career, which will also conclude with my colleague here in 2019, we know how to balance a budget. We have a law, we have a constitutional obligation to balance the budget. We've done it every time since I've been here. It's my 8th session. We know how to do it, and we'll do it again. and we'll do it in the best interests of the business community, and we'll do it in the best interests of our citizens. That's what we do, and we'll do it again. We'll make sure we have sufficient resources to do the things that Montana expects from its legislature and its government. No more, no less, but we'll get it done, and we'll work together to get it done. My pet projects have always been infrastructure. I'll say a few words about that. I would ask the Chamber and all of its members to, as I challenged you the last time I was sitting here in 2017, to deal with this infrastructure question. I believe, and I think all of you believe, and I think this state believes, that if we continue to make investments in ourselves, it's in the best interests of our state. Investing, as those who came before us have done, is a sign of confidence in our future. It's not debt. We have to define our investments as investments in our future, not heaping debt on our future generations. If the people who came before us didn't make bold moves to build our roads, build our buildings, build our water and sewer systems, we'd be in a lot worse shape today than we are. But a lot of those good decisions that were made have come time to redo. We simply have to invest in infrastructure. It creates jobs. When people are working, it's good for our state. It generates dollars that are used to pay for the other services we need to provide. And the coalition that you and your organization was strong in forming over the last few years, don't sleep on it. We're not there yet. We don't have good solutions. I appreciate the speaker speaking about being a little more open to some bonding solutions, but that's not the end all and be all of the answer. We've got to find ways to drive dollars towards infrastructure on a regular basis, on a biennial basis, so that we can rebuild what needs to be rebuilt, and we can make some investments in some new buildings that can serve our state well. We've got some expansion on our campuses, certain of our campuses, that they need help. We've got some systems locally that need investment now versus later. As someone who has advocated for the construction of our third veterans home in the state, and so pleased to know that the federal dollars came through this spring, and now we're out to bid and going to break ground on that project. It sure enough, it started as a $13.5 million project, but because of the delays, it's now going to be 16, 17 plus. And it's because we didn't make bold investments at a time when we could have to keep those costs down. These things are not going to get any cheaper, and we've got to work together to find a long-term infrastructure strategy, and you are key to making that work. And as the President said, you've got a lot of good ideas, the brain power in this room, along with the legislature. We can get it done, but let's work together. Let's see what we can get done and think about our future in the terms of investment, not in terms of debt. I'll say one more thing about the Medicaid expansion piece. I think that we have the fruits of the decisions we made in 2015 are there. I think we made good decisions. We made good decisions to make sure there was skin in the game by the people who are eligible for this Medicaid. They do pay premiums. They do pay a copay. We did create the linkage between working and receiving those benefits in terms of the HelpLink aspects of the HELP Act in 2015. The results, as you have some of of the Chamber's publications have shown that the economic impact and keeping people healthy, giving everybody access to health care is in the best interest of our state. I think we're all of the same mind that we want to sustain that access, but the real deal is the cost, and we've got to deal with the cost issue, and we've got to be open to all the ideas to make sure that program is sustainable. We will be open-minded about improving it. From my perspective, it's a matter of improving a product that was pretty good to begin with. It has proved out over the 4 years, and we'll look at all means we can to make it as sustainable as possible as we move forward. So let's just right now start focusing on how to make it better, and I think together we'll be able to get that done. I want to personally thank the Chamber for inviting me these many years, and although I will miss all of you, I will certainly not miss these 7:30 breakfasts. Thank you.
Well, much appreciated. Thank you, all four of you, for your excellent remarks. So we have some time for some Q&A, and we certainly want to make sure that we maximize the use of our time here with the generous time that they have given us. So I might start with one, actually, as folks start to think of theirs. So workforce, when we were coming up with the Envision 2026 plan, and since then, it is the number one issue that we're hearing from businesses, and Webb would always say it's not open or closed sign, it's a help wanted sign, and it's very real, and we know that it needs to be a business solution also. Businesses need to step up with their innovative ideas, and we're doing the best we can to certainly take those creative ideas and spread those around so that others can be inspired in how they're best preparing their workers for the next steps. But I want to ask each of you, or for as many of you that want to comment, I mean, as far as specifics and how your caucus is reacting to that need. We hear a lot about career and technical education funding, apprenticeship programs, grant programs, matching funds. And I might maybe just start it off with Representative Schreiner, because that is your background, and we'll take comments from others too. But what are some of the specifics to address this and to, as you said, help supply business with the tools they need to be able to achieve this and get the workers they need?
Yeah, thanks, Bridger. I think we took a step, albeit not a huge step. I think last session when we passed the apprenticeship tax credit, I don't think that was enough money to make a substantial impact in getting the ball moving, but we did see an increase of upwards of 400 statewide, which percentage-wise is a large percentage in the apprenticeship side to start helping business provide some incentive for that workforce training. But at the end of the day, to some of the comments that this Senator Sesso said, we all know training your workforce is not cheap. It's an expensive endeavor, which it ends up being cost prohibitive if you're nervous that the product you're getting in the end isn't going to stay with you. I think some specific ideas we have out there is, one, we have to get back to giving younger generations the opportunity to get workforce experience. The pendulum is swung where you have less high school students actually participating in the workforce and getting those skills. I mean, all over the state in my day job, I hear soft skills. And I will tell you, the conversation about soft skills is interesting because it's if I surveyed every person in this room on what soft skills are, I would get 80% that were similar but different answers. So it's a catch-all, but we have to, the way you don't learn how to work in school, you learn how to work at work. So we need to provide those opportunities for folks. Now, I know it's cost prohibitive. To get a 16-year-old on a work site is legal. It's totally legal if they are part of a registered or education program. but the costs associated with it for your work comp are through the roof. So one of the ideas that we've kicked around in our caucus is, does the state have some skin in that game to help you all? Is there an opportunity or a place that the state may be able to absorb some of the liability cost on having those folks in a workforce training? Now, I would say that from our perspective, we would say, okay, well then we need to set some benchmarks so that we don't have, just a kid making copies. We want them to actually be getting real skills, but I think that's a public-private partnership that we would like to explore. We have to find a way to increase the opportunity for more folks to fill into these pipelines. I think that's building avenues for businesses to engage with K-12 as well as the university system. I would say that the university system has done a very good job of opening their doors to innovative opportunities for business training that may be non-credit bearing, but I think that we have to go a little bit farther. And I think the right people are in place to do that around the state, but it's something that we have to find a way to support. Unfortunately, for the workers' side, for their skin in the game, the tools they use to be able to pay for their training sometimes are not eligible for stuff that's not credit bearing. So we have to find a way to mitigate those costs, because at the end of the day, it's a partnership between the people who want to get trained and the businesses who are putting their efficiencies on the line to train them. Just ideas. So at the end of the day, it's money. How do we find ways to support your endeavors to train them and incentivize the business community to do so? Because at the end, government training employees, especially in an expanding technological avenues of how you do business, is challenging. We deal with this with the manufacturing sector specific to apprenticeship. One of the challenges we've always ran into is, how do you get an apprenticeship in manufacturing when every manufacturer has a different process and a different program related to the technologies maybe they use in producing their product. We have to find a way to fund and develop programs in partnership with you, and that's through maybe using the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center, but then also providing opportunities for you all to innovate and come up with some solutions that we haven't thought of. This is my kind of day job, so I could talk about this for a while, but I'll start there.
Excellent, thank you. Other reactions?
Well, I see Superintendent Arnston in the room. I am a proponent of bringing back the shop class in high school. I think the world needs welders. The world needs electricians. The world needs people with skills. Not everybody has to go to a four-year institution. I also see Clayton in the room too. No offense, but I think that we've got to put pride back in the trades of our young people and make them prideful of learning a skill and making a good living that they can raise and their family on. I think that we get away from that. Again, I harped on the internet earlier. Too many of our up-and-coming workforce are playing on these computers, and they're not building the kinds of. Of course, there's a good living to be had in IT and running all of the backbone of our information technology. So we need those folks too. But what I've seen is that the shop class in high school is just not as attractive anymore. And I would like to see us put a little more emphasis on the trades, two-year training institutions in our state, have our high school graduates our high school graduates come out with trades that they can then go get some technical skills and get right into the workforce. I think we got to get back to some of that as part of the solution as well.
Good. Senator Sales.
Yeah, I agree with Senator Sesso that shop class and home ec and these different classes where when we were in school they taught lifetime skills. I think those are things that need to be reintroduced and emphasized at the high school level. When I went to colleges, and it's not for everybody, and I agree once again with Senator Sesso that we've put too much emphasis, I think, on a four-year degree. And I I remember when I graduated from college, it was the recession of the early 80s, and there weren't anybody or very few individuals who were recruiting on campus, and the atmosphere wasn't all that good for procuring a job right out of college. But I remember talking to one of my professors, and several other individuals were complaining that there were jobs and so on and so forth. And what this individual, I'll never forget it, what he said is, I haven't prepared you for a job, I've prepared you to think. And I don't think we do a very good job of preparing the younger generation to think. When I graduated, I went to work for Hewlett-Packard. They had a great training program for the position that I went into as a subcontract buyer. That was their responsibility. The university system provided me with the tools I needed to be adaptive and to think and to reason and to absorb the information that my first employer gave me the opportunity to learn. We need to get back to that. It was a model that worked very, very well. And I just keep referring back to the private sector, that if people have an incentive to better themselves, to succeed, to work, they'll do it. But if we continue to provide this ever-increasing social safety net where we're going to provide for their health care, we're going to provide for their education, we're going to provide for their well-being, their nutrition, then there just becomes less and less and less incentive for the average person to say, you know what, I'm going to step up and take the initiative to better myself. This sounds cruel, but when your stomach's growling, it's a pretty good incentive to go find something to do. Another thing is when we grew up, I don't even remember, and maybe it was just because my dad was just a tough guy, but I don't remember a whole lot of child labor laws. I started working, believe it or not, when I was 8 years old. I was very familiar with work by the time I was in high school. I was extremely familiar with work by the time I was in college. I remember cussing him, thinking, I have the meanest old man. I should be out playing baseball or going to the country club and swimming with one of my friends, but I'm here working. It was the best gift that he ever gave me, was the ability to work and to make myself marketable. I think that's a pretty good model. We need to get the younger generation to embrace work and to play less video games. I don't think they're productive. So it's a private sector solution. I think the more government gets involved, the more fouled up it gets. Thank goodness we don't get all the government we pay for. But
All right, that's enough.
you want me to shut up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, and then we'll get to you, Taylor.
So I concur with some of the things Senator Sales has said.
Sure.
I have try getting a 13 or 14-year-old kid to come over and mow your lawn at a business. Number one, the government won't even let that kid show up to mow your lawn at the business. We got regulations about that kid can't be operating a piece of equipment like that, which is unfortunate. But I think the issue is there's a lot of individuals, high school age kids, just aren't working anymore. I'm in the retail business. I used to hire a lot of high school kids 15, 20 years ago. They just can't find them, can't find the ones with the work ethic, can't show up on time for work. It's very difficult. And I think the solution is the private sector working with OPI in our high schools to incentivize and bringing the shop class back. I mean, my daughter graduated almost 20 years ago from high school. I can't believe it. But one of the things I said, you need to take the automotive class. And she really appreciated that. But those classes, a lot of those are no longer available. But I think the private sector, working not only with our high schools, but our two-year schools, and working very closely together to get the workforce out there, what we need. There are incentives out there. The federal government gives some very good incentives for people in different sectors, whether they're veterans, Native Americans, long-term unemployed, but I'm not sure just the state of Montana throwing some dollars at it is going to get us anywhere. I think just the private sector, you guys need to step up and work along with our school system.
Appreciate the remarks. Been waiting very patiently, Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Taylor Brown, Northern Ag Network. I'd just say I want to follow up on that workforce development, because I know it's the first item in the objectives here. Is workforce is the very first item that the chamber works on, and it's something all of us agree in, whether we're agriculture, whether we're business, Republican, Democrat, urban, rural. All of us are short of workforce. The biggest myth we can dispel right now is that kids can't get jobs in Montana. We spent a lot of time this fall trying to hire a Montana kid who's working in Atlanta for a big ag equipment company. Dang near got him to come back because he's a team roper and he can't find a place to team rope in Atlanta. But they just value him too much. We couldn't offer him quite enough money to get him back. We might get him next year. But I'm just saying, we're in the business. Everybody in this room are trying for how do we get a workforce? How do we, and if kids are leaving Montana for jobs, it's crazy because we've got the jobs and we're just begging them to stay. But at that same token, as we talk about what public and private can do, let me just say one quick personal note. I enjoyed working with all four of you in my time in the legislature. What I'm working on now is building a new high school in Lockwood, and they're going to break ground on that Lockwood High School, that new Class A school, as soon as the ground thaws this spring. And the first building we're going to build is a career and tech ed building to put an auto shop in and a mechanic shop and a wood shop, because Lockwood is a blue-collar community with a refinery and manufacturing and auto body and HVAC, and they need those kids. So we'll have school-to-work programs. And I encourage every employer in the room to think about what the speaker just said about school-to-work programs. Those kids learn to work because we reward them and we get them engaged. But we can't do it without those career and tech ed programs in the high school. And now let me point back at you guys. Last fall when you met, you cut that program in half. Last fall, and I'm sitting here with the superintendent, so I don't want to tell her how to run education, but you remember 2 years ago, we doubled the career and tech ed program to about $40-some per student, still about a tenth of what North Dakota spends, about a tenth of what Washington spends. You wonder why the kids are going, why they're developing their workforce. But last fall when you met, you cut that program in half. You cut the career and tech ed. So for you to sit up there and say to us that we need to do more for career and tech ed, gentlemen, do what you can to replace that career and tech ed money so we can have these shop classes. Because like for Lockwood, they're building it. They're going ahead. But now we've jerked the money out from under them. So I know you're focused on that. Thank you very much. You don't all need to comment on it. Probably it starts over in the House. So I know Speaker Hertz is probably the one who's working with his appropriates committee the closest. But we can do it. We're ready to hire them. We can do it. But you got to put that money back in for career and tech ed.
All right. More questions? Brent? Oh yeah, do you guys want, please comment. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it is a priority, I believe, of just about every legislator that I talk to. So we're definitely going to be looking at reinstalling those dollars. But as Senator Sales had talked about, those cuts did come at the suggestion of the governor. And when you get called to a special session with 1 week notice and actually got 2 or 3 days to put stuff together, you know, it's very difficult to 150 legislators to agree on what you're going to cut. So we just took what was given to us.
So my memory's a little different of that, but that's okay. So what I will tell you this, that we need to dispel. I dispel this myth about CTE. CTE is actually in the best place nationally and more innovative and productive than it's ever been. You have HOSA opportunities, you have DECA opportunities, you have, it's no longer seen as CTE, it's CTEA, Career and Technical and Ag Education. I believe we're even doing that within our Office of Public Instruction in Montana. It's a good time to be a student who wants to get your hands dirty and learn some things in the CTE world. I will also say, because I think my colleagues that have sandwiched me here would really appreciate me to point out that we actually did not vote to cut those. We did not vote for any of those, and we were heavily against cutting CTE because the Democrats see the value, and we've been talking about workforce development forever. So only one party took that vote. So,
Senator Sales?
I wasn't even going to say anything, but I can't let that stand. I'll go back to the fact we passed a revenue estimate in 17 that has proved to be very, very accurate. We didn't call a special session in 17. That was the governor trying to hold a gun to our head to raise taxes on all of you and all the citizens of Montana. We resisted. We implemented the cuts that the governor requested. Whether the Democrats in the House and Senate voted for it, they own it. The leader of their party brought those individual cuts to the legislature with a couple days' notice. They were unnecessary. Had we just stayed the course, everything would have been fine. So we wasted a bunch of money on a special session that we didn't need, implemented by a Democrat governor. So I just want to get the record straight there. That wasn't us calling ourselves back in. We tried that later. With that said, now I hesitate to let the last guy have the last word, but we'll take the next question.
I am going to leave the discussion there, and you'll have the man who leads us, Governor Bullock, at your lunch. I don't know why he gets the lunch and I get the breakfast, but he'll be here. He'll answer that question, and let's bring it up to him and make sure. Bottom line is, looks like there's a consensus, and the fact that we're doing well in that area, let's double down and do better and move forward, and let's keep our eyes forward and not go backwards. So talk to the governor about that being a priority of the chamber, and we'll move it forward.
All right. Thank you. Brent.
Yeah, I'll tee up a softball for you guys and talk about revenue. So we work in infrastructure. I run an engineering company, and we work in the region. And Montana doesn't have real funding for infrastructure. I mean, compared to our peer states. And we are, the funding that we do have is property tax based. We can do SIDs, RSIDs, we can pass bonds for schools. What are we going to do to diversify our revenue for infrastructure?
Well, let me just say this. We have to get past this notion that there aren't any ways to raise revenue if it results in a tax increase. There are ways you can raise revenue, and you got to be open-minded about it. As we all will say, nobody wants to raise taxes. Nobody wants to do that to hard-working Montanans. But there are ways we can raise revenue. There are also ways that we can leverage our coal dollars. I was talking to Bud earlier and how we got to continue to understand how much coal means to the economy in Montana, and the severance taxes that are paid that are then plowed into. I think the speaker had the one extra zero on his $1 billion that we get to spend annual or biannually on infrastructure. We're at about $100 million in terms of dollars we've been able to channel from various sources. But that's not enough. That is not going to sustain the level of investment. So we've talked about ways in the interim committee on the finance committee. We had a subcommittee on infrastructure, and to address the question really that's been asked this morning. And it has to be a combination of channeling some of those, in my view. I think that we have a lot of ideas that we looked at, but in other states that we reviewed this past interim, there are regular investments that are made where the state actually takes a percentage of its general fund and puts it in to the infrastructure, and then it allows the state's managers to pick the projects going forward. It's almost like they raise the revenue first and then they go forward with the projects. We have it a little bit reverse. We have this whole big list of projects that everybody wants us to fund, and then we have to cut it off based on the dollars we have available. So it's not easy, but it takes a will. Really, it takes a will to actually allocate a percentage of your general fund dollars to the endeavor and prioritize our investments in infrastructure on the same level with our investments in medical services and in education, incarceration, and all the other major things we spend money on. We have to do it intentionally. We can't just think that, well, on a good year we'll be able to do this. Then the good year never comes, or the revenue, when we do have high revenues, we are insistent about maybe some tax cuts, or we're insistent about spending the money in different ways. And just like all of you and all of your buildings, the deferred maintenance is always the last thing that gets the dollar when times are tight. So I think that it's a matter of will, and it's a matter of being intentional about investing in infrastructure. And then the P3 examples that I've seen, although they're really for the public-private partnerships, they're really for big projects, and we maybe have to take the kernel of the idea of a public-private partnership and start applying them to some of the smaller scale projects in Montana that we need. So we'll have several proposals in the long-range planning that we're going to contemplate this year, and we sure appreciate any input that you provide from the engineering community as well as the business community as a whole, because I believe in making these investments, and we've got to be intentional about it.
I'll be brief. I really am encouraged, and not encouraged because I've known John's been a pro-resource development guy from the get-go, and coal is a big issue in the state. I can't believe it took me so many years to get down to Colstrip. I went down for a tour just this fall. That's an asset that we can't afford to lose. I think it's of national strategic importance. We're really going to lose something if and when those generating units shut down. But if we want to spend more money, we need to grow our economy, and I appreciate all aspects of our economy, whether it be recreation and those jobs associated with the service industry and like, but the best jobs are these resource jobs where people are mining and producing and value adding stuff from the earth, and we have a lot of it here in the state. We've been extremely blessed, and we need those two mines up in the northwest corner of the state. We need that copper mine over in the Marr County. Those jobs pay $80,000 plus per individual. Those type of corporations pay huge tax dollars to the private communities and the counties, way better than PILT dollars from the federal government for BLM or for the Forest Service. So let's reduce this resistance to those type of projects that are, in my opinion, extremely environmentally safe. We have some of the best environmental laws to protect our pristine environment. Nobody appreciates that more than I think Montanans that enjoy the outdoors. So we can have both, and we need both. And if we want to spend more money on infrastructure, let's grow our economy, and the best way to do it are those type of jobs.
When my comments about infrastructure and Senator Sesso's, I was talking about leverage dollars between local, state, and federal dollars, and how we leverage that into a significant amount of money, reaching close to $1 billion, and that includes highway projects also, and everything that we do across this state. You got to remember our $10 billion biennium budget in Montana. I think about 47% of that is federal dollars, so it's a significant amount of money. But we do need to improve and increase the economy, and I was so glad the citizens of Montana voted down I-186. They saw that what natural resource development does for this state, and all the minerals that we have in this state, we need to continue to prosper and help those, not only the jobs that they create, but the auxiliary jobs around those, and the tax base that they help us bring into the state, which then we can leverage into more infrastructure projects.
All right, we got a question over here.
Racine Frady, Glacier Country Regional Tourism Commission. There's been a lot of talk about the cuts that happened during the special session. Regardless of how they came about, can I ask what your thoughts are or intentions are regarding rolling that back to the point of reinstating the funding in those programs that were cut? Are those going to be brought back?
So I'm pretty simple. We've made it a priority to make sure that happens. There's some stuff that happened that was pretty devastating. So from our perspective, and we need partners in doing this, but yeah, that's a starting place for us, and then we need to figure out from there how we enhance those opportunities for folks.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree with Minority Leader that it is a priority, especially some of these community-based programs that did get cut. And it's unfortunate. Even if we do reinstate some of those, it may be difficult to get some of those, especially those nonprofits, to come back. But we are strongly looking at that in the budget.
Good. Dan, there.
Good morning. John Arneson with Northern Broadcasting, Voices of Montana. Mr. Sales kind of stole my thunder a little bit. We're a very, very wealthy state if we can dig it. There's a lot of people out there that they don't want anything to do with digging in the dirt. Oil, coal, palladium, you name it. We've got to soften some of those regulations, get that tax base up. I'd like to hear the Democrats talk a little bit about mining and loosening some of the regulations, and also looking at some of the mines that are doing a great job. They're doing the best they can. Getting a little support from some of the Democrats as well. I think it'd be very, very advantageous to raise the base so we can, everything that we're talking about is about money. We have money, it's in the ground. So just want to reiterate that. And if you guys would like to comment, I'd love to hear it. Thank you.
Well, first of all, as a miner in Butte, I put copper on your list. The mine in the town I represent is the lifeline of the entire economy, quite frankly. So I don't consider it a issue of regulations, and I certainly don't consider it a Democratic and Republican issue. The miners in Butte don't tell me and ask me to reduce regulations. They tell me to make sure it doesn't change. They want the regulation that's in place, and they want it to stay in place. They're prepared to meet those regulations and to protect the environment. They just don't want it to change. So I think it is not my endeavor to reduce regulations. That's not the questions that I'm asked from the mining industry. It is to keep it certain so that they can build their pro forma spreadsheet. They know what their return is based on the reality of getting their permit today, and they don't want it to change halfway through their investment cycle. That's what I'm working on, and I think my colleagues will agree. I think it's a misnomer to think that it is a matter of reducing regulations. It's a matter of keeping the regulations, because as was said, both sides of the aisle, Montanans expect us to dig and use our natural resources to build our economy, but they have a high premium, and some of the members in this room put a high premium on clean water, clean air, and all the natural beauty of our state. that generates a hefty tourism industry that we all share in as well. There's a balance. I agree with the president that we can have both, and I've made it my legislative career to try to find the middle between making sure we get all we can out of our natural resources, and I don't think that's a Democrat-Republican question, and protect the natural beauty of our state so all industries, all businesses can rise up and take advantage of what Montana has to offer. We'll continue to strive towards that balance. That's what I'm dedicated to, and I think we'll all work on that together.
Good. All right. We're getting close, so I'll close with this last question, unless I don't see anybody else, I don't think. And it's kind of a loaded one, so we'll see how brief we can keep it. But tax climate. It's the talk of the town. It's always been the talk of the town. In fact, in this very room yesterday, we heard from an economist tell us, after a thorough analysis of our tax structure, that we have the 12th highest effective tax rates on business in the country, despite what other rankings might be putting out there. So I want to know your response, each of you, to the conversations going on about new economy, online transactions, our burgeoning tourism economy, how are we capturing that revenue, and whether our tax structure is outdated in today's economy, and if we're talking tax reform in the near future, what would you like to see be the tenets of that, if there's some comments there?
Well,
Thank you, Speaker.
I'll start, Bridger. Are you talking about a sales tax?
What? What?
So, of course, we all know, living here in Montana, you can't talk about a sales tax. We need to discuss it, at least. I'm not in favor of adding another tax onto the citizens of Montana. I mean, obviously, if you've got, because taxes never seem to go down. Once you put another one on, they just keep going up and up and up. So, but our economy has changed. I mean, I've lived in Montana all my life, in northwest Montana, and sawmills have disappeared, and all the jobs have turned into service-type jobs. Some of those don't pay as well as those type of jobs. And we do have more of a service, service-type economy, and that lends itself better somewhat to a more stable tax base, like a sales tax, and not so much for an income tax. And when you look at taxes, it's kind of amazing to me, some of people's attitudes about tax. So we had the proposed $2 a pack cigarette tax, and people behind that were talking about, we put this tax on it, it's going to incentivize people to quit smoking. Why don't they use that same analogy if we put a high income tax on individuals, that it's going to discourage people from making more money or more income? So I think it all applies evenly. You don't want to disincentivize anybody or anyone. But I think the discussion, it's going to take a long time to get through this possible sales tax if we ever get there. But I'm not afraid to talk about it. But one thing that I don't want to see is just another layer of taxation on the citizens of Montana and going forward. So,
thank you, Representative Schreiner.
Yeah, and it might not be popular. The people of Montana have spoken on numerous occasions in many different forms of venues that the sales tax is just not something statewide that they are going to agree to. I will say it's a really interesting conversation. I would say that Democrats understand, and we are very open to the conversation about revenue, and not just new or old sources, but how do we diversify? I thought the diversification question was great, but the truth is that we're a citizen legislature, and we do rely on folks to bring their ideas to us. So I would heavily encourage every person in this room who has those ideas to don't keep them in your brain or within your family. You need to bring those forward, because we are in a situation that, and I'll say, no matter whose fault the cuts were, it's a difficult conversation to have about how do we improve the tax climate when we have when we have so many services for people's livelihood being cut. And unfortunately, as my first thing I said, they're all connected. We are very open to the conversation about what can we do to change and improve the system. The problem is we have to take off these party hats to have a real honest conversation about that. And in today's political climate, that's challenging. I think in Montana, we are in a place that we can do that. Most of our communities, we all would, if you want to use the color thing, we're Great Falls, for example, we're purple communities. It's a little easier for us to do that. But the second we end up in the newspaper, or John hates the internet apparently, but on the internet, that really has broke down these conversations, and I think it's been pushing a decade, which has caused this problem. So, I mean, I think everybody up here is committed to those conversations, but your budget is a values-based document, and unfortunately, there's a lot of need in our state. And so how do we mitigate the need for all the services that are so expensive, and also discuss how it's a delicate balance, I guess is what I'm getting at. So we're open to the conversation, not so much on the sales tax, to be honest with you, just being candid, but any other innovative ideas. We need innovative ideas because you're right, the economy's changed and we need a structure that changes along with it.
Yeah, the economy is changing, and it's as more and more people shop online, it's putting more added pressure on the brick and mortar businesses that pay the property tax and the infrastructure and hire local people. Makes it more difficult for them to compete. I think we're going to be forced to have a look at the overall tax system in the state of Montana sometime in the future. I'm not going to be here, but we can stick our head in the sand for a number of more years and just say that we're not going to do it, but it's going to happen. It's going to be forced upon us. I find it a little bit odd that some of the most progressive states in the nation have real high sales taxes. If you look at, like Washington, California, they somehow see fit to have entertained that idea. I think that the speaker's spot on. As we have progressed more to a service and recreational type economy, a sales tax makes more sense. I have spoken to you many times. I'm not afraid of the word, but I don't want to see a third leg of the stool. I'd like to see us go to either like a Wyoming model or Nevada or Florida, or I think Texas. Is Texas in that too? South Dakota. So, if you really look at the economies that are booming around the country right now from a state, they have a more model that resembles that. I think it would benefit the economy here in Montana, and this is inevitable that this conversation, whether people are adverse to it or not, is going to happen at some point. It's just going to have to. But I'm not for a three-legged stool, but I am for taking a harder look at the sales tax.
Well, I don't really have much to add. I mean, the public, the people of Montana have spoken. They don't want a sales tax. They don't want it. That we can talk about it all we want, and it has to be put on the ballot based on the laws we have on the books. And when we put it on the ballot, it's going to be turned down. I think it's a difficult nut to crack, because I agree with everything that's been said. A number of sales that take place on the internet relative to the number of sales that used to take place on Main Street is really making a big dent in all of our businesses, our Main Street businesses, retail in particular, but even the goods and the services that are provided online now, and none of them being taxed, and not really paying their fair share, even on corporate and individual income taxes. It's something we got to deal with. I'm not sure what the answer is. I haven't seen this. I mean, it's a little bit strange to me that we went from, in just this decade, we've went from a much higher ranking of the best sale or the best tax climate And I remember seeing rankings of 6 and 8 in terms of the tax climate to do business in our state, and now we're the 12th highest. I mean, I also got to say, I mean, I certainly was not a proponent, and it's not a popular thing, I'm sure, in this room, but, you know, the federal tax changes. It seems to me if we as a state went from a pretty good place to do business to now, you know, the top 10 worst places, if that's what you're saying, Bridger, and in the same time period, the federal government changed the tax rate. You know, I'd have to look at the correlation therein, but I overall, I mean, I'm sure willing to listen to every business on whether or not you think that corporations and businesses are taxed too much, and if you have some ideas on how do we replace that revenue. But if you start the conversation by saying a sales tax is not one of the options, well, okay, let's hear it. If you want to pay less, who's going to pay more? I mean, in my 16 years here, we have shifted more and more on individuals and away from businesses over the course of trying to still provide the public services that the public demands. So it's a tough question. It's something we've got to deal with because people are choosing to buy their goods and services in different ways, and we've got to react to that as a state. But I'll just close by saying I'm all ears on any ideas that you have. But I don't see a sales tax passing anytime soon.
Right. Well, I think, you know, being all ears is the most we can ask for, and we really appreciate that especially the four of you are all ears about what we can do about our tax climate and all these other issues going forward. I mean, I know that, you know, it's been a little while since those last polls on sales tax, and I think more people are talking about it. You know, not necessarily that we're out in front of it at this time, but I think it's showing that people are starting to think even further about what makes sense for a tax structure today versus, you know, how we've had it for as long as we have. So there's just a lot of great conversation, and that's what this is all about. And first of all, just thank you to the four of you for being here and for your service to the Montana State Legislature. So let's have another round for our esteemed guests.